Hello everyone, this is part 20 of What If Naruto Was a Puppeteer, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
The remainder of their trip back to Konoha was made in terse silence. Occasionally, Hanabi would make as if to speak, only to find the words dying on her tongue as she looked up at Naruto's back. He hadn't so much as looked at her since the encounter with Hisashi, simply striding forward at that same, measured pace. She couldn't even lose herself to the sweet tedium of sprinting through the trees. It seems he wanted to deny her even that, allowing her to stew in her own miserable thoughts for the entire journey. It broiled and simmered inside of her the entire way back, finally reaching a head when they came within sight of the gate. She hurried her step, overtaking him, only to round on him, looking up and forcing her to meet his eye. Just say it already, I know you want to. She might have preferred some anger, or disappointment. Instead, he just regarded her coolly. What do you want me to say? That you disobeyed me. That you didn't trust me. That you endangered yourself despite my assertions that I had things in hand. Each accusation stung much worse than the hundreds of times they had circulated through her mind. I just wanted to help, to do something, she muttered, beginning to lose her grit, but still forcing herself to meet those cold blue eyes. Hanabi, the only way you could have helped there was to stay back and let me work. And that's why I couldn't. She shot back, throwing her arms up angrily. Later, she would be mortified at allowing so much emotion to bleed through so close to the gates, where they might be heard and this could get back to her father. Right now though, she couldn't care less. Because it was just work to you. That was my uncle, my family. And he could have killed you. Naruto shot right back, bringing her up short with the slightly heated edge to his own voice. Is that what you would have wanted? Being killed because of some misplaced sentimentality? You would have wasted all that effort I poured into you, because you couldn't recognize how outclassed you were there. Hanabi physically recoiled from that. Is that all I am to you? Some project you've sunk a bit of effort into. Her head lowered slightly, brow creasing. You haven't changed at all, have you? When you said you'd come to enjoy the mask, I thought you were joking. But, you don't even get it, do you? You think you're trying to do good now, but you don't even get what good is. You're changing the subject, Naruto growled back, eyes narrowing. This is about your lack of trust in me. Hanabi, we've already had our conversation about overprotectiveness, so when I tell you that you need to stay back, it's because I genuinely believe that it's too dangerous. Don't you get that? I do, she whispered quietly, looking up at him strangely. I really do. Because I see now that you don't care at all, you're just motivated by numbers and guilt. I'm just an asset you find more valuable than most because of how much work you've had to put in. Do you even care about teaching me? Am I just some kind of experiment? Before he could respond, she turned and ran off towards the village, making him grit his teeth in irritation. He forced himself to take a moment to calm down, running a hand through his hair and staring at the sky. It took that much to make him realize how his words may have come across in the heat of the moment, and he sighed. He couldn't let things stand like that, and made to go after her, only to walk right into something, and bounce right off. You, the woman growled, and Naruto suddenly found himself grabbed by the front of his flak jacket and lifted off his feet with almost contemptuous ease. He had never met Senju Tsunade before, but he had to admit that the descriptions he had heard were spot on. Blonde hair in twin ponytails, a green jacket bearing the ironic kanji for gambling on the back, a small blue diamond on her forehead, and, of course, her enormous. Tsunade cinched the blonde higher before slamming him roughly into the dusty road, cratering the ground. When the dust cleared though, all that lay in the depression was the shattered wooden remains of a humanoid puppet, causing Tsunade to blink in confusion. From behind, her companion shifted from foot to foot anxiously, glancing between her mentor and the destruction she had already caused. Lady Tsunade, you can't just attack Konoha shinobi like that. I agree, Naruto muttered as he walked back onto the road from the side, dusting off his jacket. Somewhat strange introductions aside, is there something I can help you with, Senju Tsunade? He gave her a once-over, but far from most gazes that lingered on the legendary slug princess, his was purely analytical. I think I would have remembered getting into your bad graces, and as much as I'd love to get to the bottom of this, I really have something else I need to do right now. The older blonde's lips twisted into a snarl as she stepped forward. Like hell you're just walking away after what you did. Naruto humored her, knowing from a few reports how much damage this woman could do when incensed, or drunk. Right now, she looked more than a little of both. And what exactly did I do? There could be any number of answers to that, some of them even legitimate. He only lingered because he genuinely couldn't think of a reason why Senju Tsunade of all people might be angry with him. My grandfather's cells, she growled, eyes narrowing. Or did you think the hospital wouldn't tell me somebody had come in asking for an analysis of Senju bloody Hashirama's tissue? Ah, well, that certainly explained some of the stranger properties of what he had taken to calling the Zetsu clones. He was somewhat miffed that the hospital had gone over his head. Contacting the nearest biological relative was standard procedure when these things happened, disturbingly common in the shinobi world thanks to bloodline theft, but he had thought he had enough sway within the hospital to at least be warned. He put a hand to his temple, feeling a headache coming on, but he knew there was no getting around this. At least for once he could legitimately say he had done nothing wrong, mostly. Fine then, let's go get this sorted, he muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. That at least seemed to take the wind out of Tsunade's sails. She hadn't expected such a lackadaisical answer when she had received the letter saying a sample of her grandfather's DNA had turned up in the hospital's labs. It had brought back all too familiar memories of similar news informing her of Orochimaru's betrayal and all of the sick, twisted things he had done. Grave robbing was the least of it, and she couldn't help but compare the two. To find the blonde in front of her not the least bit concerned with the revelation was, actually kind of disappointing. She had been itching for a fight, so much that she had actually come all the way back to Konoha. That didn't make it any less painful when she found herself back under her sensei's kindly smile, standing in front of his desk like the last few decades hadn't happened and she was just a kid again, waiting to be admonished for yet another stint of property damage. Tsunade, Hiruzen greeted, smiling broadly as if this was some pleasant surprise she had sprung on him by practically throwing Naruto through his office door. Well, probably Naruto. The kid had already evaded her grasp twice with those damnable puppets. She snorted at the act, as if the Sandaime had probably known she was here hours before she came within sight of the village walls. What do I owe the unexpected pleasure? Her eye twitched. Apparently, there's been some kind of misunderstanding that needs clearing up. And I'd like to get that over with as soon as possible so I can get back to my life. She shot a withering look at Naruto when the younger blonde scoffed. Got something to add, runt? He turned a skeptical eyebrow up at her. Firstly, he was 5'8", and had what appeared to be a good 4 inches on her. Secondly, what? Your glamorous life of drinking and gambling away whatever respect you managed to gain in your career. He turned to the Hokage, already irritated at having to deal with this farce. I agree though, can we just get on with this? I haven't done anything wrong and I have something I really need to deal with. Tsunade smirked, it wasn't a pleasant expression. What? Your little student running out on you in a huff? Naruto just turned to her without flinching, lips twisting. The sight hit a little close to home, did it? Or did the fact that this is the first time you've been back to the village you deserted 2 decades ago slip past you? Tsunade turned fully to the younger blonde, squaring up. You got something to say about the way I choose to live my life? Naruto fronted her just as brazenly, eyes narrowed. You call that drunken haze you stumble around in, living? Tsunade's knuckles cracked dangerously, just as Naruto flexed his good hand, neither of them refusing to flinch from their other's glare. The pressure in the room was stifling as the slug Sanin brought some of her impressive aura to bear, her chakra pressing down on the occupants like a physical weight. It was only when Naruto began matching it with a trickle of the fox's power that Hiruzen slammed his fist on the desk. Stop this, the both of you. His hard, commanding voice cut right through the tension like a knife, causing both shinobi to flinch involuntarily. I have enough genin coming through this office every day without having 2 of my strongest ninja acting like children. His gaze drifted between the 2 of them. Tsunade, I understand your reasons for how you choose to live better than most, but in my office I expect you to act with a shred of the maturity I know you're capable of. His gaze flickered to the puppeteer. And Naruto, just what has gotten into you? The blonde forced himself to take a deep breath before nodding, abashed. Sorry, it's been a long day. Tsunade's lip twitched, like she wanted to make a comment, but a single glance from her former sensei was enough to stop it cold. With the stifling pressure in the room lifted, much to the relief of Shizune, Hiruzen nodded, spreading his hands diplomatically before waving off the concerns of the Anbu that had leapt down to his side defensively. Your immature dispute aside, I believe we can start to get to the heart of this matter. The entire room appeared to freeze as Hiruzen jerked in place, staring blankly down at the sword emerging from his chest. The Anbu that drove it there pulled it back out with a sick squelch in time to block a slash from one of his comrades. He wasn't nearly fast enough to avoid the chakra strings that latched onto his body though, freezing him in place. Naruto had done that more on reflex than anything else, having been staring at the Hokage in blank shock. The other Anbu guards on the room tackling their traitorous comrade to the ground finally dragged him out of it and he rushed forward, catching the Hokage as he fell to side, convulsing. A quick check of the injury revealed what he suspected, poison. A strong 1-2 by the looks of things. Somebody like the Sandaime, even as old as he was, wouldn't be reacting nearly this badly to most of the concoctions Naruto could have come up with. Medic. He called frantically, knowing such a lethal injury was well beyond his own meager medical skills. He wanted to kick himself when he realized just who he was sharing a room with. However, when he turned to look at Tsunade, he found the woman completely frozen. She was staring down at her hands, lightly spattered with the Hokage's blood, and was currently shivering and hyperventilating. Well fuck, the world's greatest medic, and quite possible the Sandaime's only hope here, was apparently hemophobic. Shizune rushed to his side instead, hands wreathed in green chakra as she worked to stabilize the Hokage, who appeared to already be going into shock. It was clear that the young woman was completely overwhelmed though, despite her calm, professional movements. It gave the Sandaime time though, time enough for Naruto to stand up, cross the distance and solidly deck Tsunade right in the face. It felt like punching a steel wall, and if he hadn't used his prosthetic, Naruto might have dislocated his wrist. Still, it managed to knock the woman on her ass, finally breaking her out of whatever shock she had lapsed into. Her first reaction was surprise at being struck, a sentiment matched around the room by the various guards, before morphing into anger. She didn't get much of a chance to vent it before the young blonde was in her face, eyes hard. Get your ass in gear, woman. Your sensei is dying over there. Thankfully, that simply fact seemed to override all else, and Tsunade quickly scrabbled over to Hiruzen's side, practically pushing Shizune out of the way. She was only working on the man for a few seconds before she grunted in frustration. I don't recognize this poison. It's counteracting my efforts to heal him. Her eyes widened slightly as Naruto dropped down next to her, producing a portable field kit from one of his many scrolls and quickly taking a swab from within the Sandaime's wound. Ugly black lines had begun to crawl outward across his skin, only held at bay by Tsunade's practiced hand. Naruto worked as fast as he could beside her, analyzing the poison against reagent after reagent, his brow increasingly furrowing. Tsunade was right. He didn't recognize this poison either. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Hell, it was unlike most of the stuff he was working on. The complexity alone was tremendous, and more pressingly, was interfering with his abilities to narrow down the vector. Frustrated, and noting the Hokage's rapidly demying condition, he threw caution to the wind and worked on a hunch. He added a drop of his own blood to the testing kit and the minute the liquid turned a pearly white he pulled out a syringe and plunged it into the Hokage's chest. What the hell did you just do? Tsunade cried, using her mystic palm to try and figure out what the Hokage had just been injected with. Immunosuppressant, the blonde muttered back, scooting around the prone Hokage to check his pulse. Are you trying to kill him faster? Tsunade growled. She would have reached across to grab the teen if she wasn't finger deep inside the village's leader, trying to reconnect tissue that was actively resisting her healing techniques. The poison's animal-based, partially synthetic, specially designed, he explained, counting in his head as he kept track of the man's pulse. It's not the problem, it's just the vector for some kind of enzyme coded to his DNA. His theory was supported by the total lack of reaction with his own blood, and confirmed when a moment later the Hokage visibly stilled, breathing and heart rate returning to something resembling normal. It was corrupting his white blood cells, altering them to attack his own tissue, killing him from the inside out. I'd have to test it more to work out how. Tsunade didn't know what to say to that, but the wound had stopped resisting her attempts to heal it, so she took it as a small mercy. That's not the same thing as a cure, she noted after she had the chance to think on what he'd said, still working furiously to close over the stab wound. That stops the poison from doing its damage, but leaves an old man without his immune system. But it buys us time, Naruto countered. It was a double-edged sword. It saved the Hokage in the immediate, allowing the more pressing wound to be dealt with. Hokage or not, he would still bleed out from being stabbed clean through the chest, but left him at extreme risk of infection or disease while they worked on a more permanent solution. In the meantime, scowl on his face, Naruto vaulted the Hokage's desk to look at the Anbu restrained on the floor. Why did you do this? He recognized this man. He'd been one of the Hokage's guards for years, almost as permanent a fixture in this office as the paintings of the former Hokage or the Sandaim's pipe. His mask had been taken away, revealing a rather unassuming face with mousy brown hair and a light scar under his left eye, currently glaring back at the blonde defiantly. Fine, Naruto growled, flexing his hand menacingly. Don't say, I think I'd rather pull it from you he trailed off, zeroing in on what appeared to be a small twig emerging from the man's shoulder. Eyes widening in realization, his hand shot out once again latching chakra strings to the assassin. Before the eyes of everyone in the room, he twisted and wreathed in place, skin going a chalky white as his distinguishing features melted away into a bland, formless white humanoid. Zetsu, Naruto growled, only for his eyes to widen further at the implication. His prosthetic shot out, nearly 100 glowing chakra strings spiraling off the arm and spreading out throughout the room until it resembled some strange, glowing spider web. Tsunade, Shizune and two of the Anbu guards simply stared around in confusion, wondering what the blonde was doing. The last guard, however, began to twitch and writhe, skin already turning pale. Before he could do anything, Naruto had already turned, palmed a kunai and thrown it. Immobilized by the chakra threads, the other Zetsu clone could do nothing as it slammed into its head, killing it instantly. The chakra strings retracted, and Naruto let out an audible sigh of relief, glancing between the two imposters with irritation. Last time he had run into these things they had been disguised as samurai. He thought they could just make themselves look human. He didn't realize they could imitate people, right down to the chakra signature by the look of things. Okay, Tsunade growled as she looked between the two creatures. Just what the hell are those things? Long story, Naruto muttered as he moved back to the Sandaim's side, now looking significantly farther from death's door. And far from our biggest concern, don't you think? Naruto had commandeered the hospital's lab, there having been little time to go home and use his own, although he did send a clone to collect some of his more delicate and specialized equipment. The Hokage was being seen to in a private room that the Mednins had decontaminated to the best of their abilities. As he was now, even a small infection could be lethal, but at least not more so than if his body had been allowed to attack itself. The poison in front of him continued to vex. In fact, it was more a weaponized disease than a poison, and only Naruto's occasional exploits into similar research gave him any kind of reference to work off. Saying that, he had never gone through with any of them. They were far too convoluted and complex when a simpler poison sufficed more often than not. Now he was starting to see the benefits. Biological agents like this were notoriously difficult to combat, especially as whatever enzyme was being used was unlike anything he had ever seen. It appeared to be drawing in energy from the host body in order to replicate and spread far faster than should have been natural. If a disease could use chakra, it would look like this. And wasn't that a terrifying thought? Thankfully, the poison required direct intravenous contact to work, and seemed to have been specifically engineered to work on the Hokage's DNA alone. No chance of spreading, but much harder to cure. Any attempts to do so the traditional way would be more likely to irrevocably destroy the old man's immune system for good, if the treatment didn't just destroy his cells. That was just a death sentence by another name. In any other circumstances he would have loved to study this poison at his leisure. He definitely wanted to replicate it if he could. Unfortunately, he was on something of a clock in that regard. Hey kid, Jiraiya greeted, leaning against the door as if he had been there for a while. Naruto knew he had not, he just liked to be dramatic. I told you to stop calling me that. Dozens of times in fact. The older man walked over, examining the blonde's work without any comprehension. Medicine and poisons had never been his thing. Too exacting and delicate. His movements had none of the usual boisterousness about them. In fact, he seemed downright reserved. Hardly surprising, given the circumstances. How goes it? Naruto paused in his work, artificial fingers drumming against the side of the microscope. In a word, badly. This enzyme Orochimaru's used is incredible, unlike anything I've ever seen. How do you know it was Orochimaru? Jiraiya asked without much conviction. Even without the fact that few people could have concocted a poison so intricate and foul, and the fact that he was the last person Zetsu was seen with, and he had the greatest motive to kill the Sandaime, it didn't take an educated guess to tell who was behind this. Naruto didn't even dignify him with a response, instead just giving him a flat look until the man sighed. I always thought if he ever tried something like this, it would at least be in person. I guess after the fiasco with the Chunin exams, he decided on something more indirect. His hand clenched into a fist as he talked. I was there to help Sensei back then, but not this time. Naruto returned to his work. He needed to see how the enzyme responded to various stimuli, to see if it could be safely neutralized. You can hardly go around protecting the Hokage all the time. That's what his guard is for. Although, considering somebody impersonating his bodyguard did this, that was a somewhat moot point. Jiraiya grunted, but didn't refute it. So, what makes this such a tricky poison? I've never seen Tsunadheim so stuck before. The woman was off conducting her own experiments as they spoke. Both she and Naruto had agreed that tackling this from two different perspectives, medical and chemical, was more likely to get results. Personally, he just thought that the two couldn't stand to be in the same room as one another. The hostility, after he had full-on decked her just to make a point, was palpable. Like I said, it's this enzyme. It's unnaturally resistant and seems to draw external energy to sustain itself and replicate. He swabbed a small sample onto a cotton bud and held it up to the man. Watch. He moved over to a small potted plant further down the counter and wiped the dark purple ichor on one of the leaves. Nothing happened for a moment, until the parts of the plant in contact with the poison began to turn yellow and the little patch of purple spread outwards rapidly. You ever seen something like that before? He was surprised to find Jiraiya staring at the plant intently, brow furrowed. As a matter of fact, yes. It reminds me of when I try to use Sage Mode in an area with limited natural energy. Sage Mode. That's the thing you used when you killed Nagato, right? Jiraiya flinched minutely at the reminder, but nodded all the same. Someone's done their homework. What can I say? When something intrigues me, I find out about it. It had been a bitch too. There were only a few scattered references to the manipulation of natural energy, and mostly in accounts of the Shodai Hokage. So, you're saying this enzyme is somehow drawing in natural energy to work? Jiraiya didn't answer, observing the slowly wilting plant and standing incredibly still. Slowly, the red tattoos under his eyes lengthened and his nose seemed to bulge. A moment later the changes faded back and he nodded, brow furrowed. Definitely natural energy, but unfocused, poorly molded. Is there anything you could do with that? Naruto asked, only to have the older man shake his head. What about you? Does knowing this change anything? Naruto turned back to the dying plant, observing it carefully. He wasn't sure, not familiar enough with the workings of senjutsu or natural energy beyond cursory readings. Maybe. I don't know. I would need an inactive sample of the enzyme for comparison. With that, he could work out if there were chemical triggers to begin the process of drawing in natural energy and come up with an appropriate antigen. Without its ability to propagate so rapidly, they might be able to flush the poison from the Hokage's system without compromising his remaining immune system. Then it would be a matter of allowing the man to recover. Unfortunately, I can't imagine where we would find something like. He was startled when Jiraiya suddenly slammed his fist into his palm, grinning broadly. Now I remember why all this talk of enzymes was so damn familiar. I might just be able to help you out there. He glanced back at Naruto, only for his sudden upturn in mood to vanish just as abruptly. Oh, I sort of got sidetracked. This wasn't what I came here to talk to you about. Naruto was unnerved by the sudden seriousness from the usually irreverent man. It seems Orochimaru had more than just killing the old man in mind. The sweep of the village revealed a number of clan children have gone missing, all of them bloodline users. Naruto almost knew what he was going to say before he did, he just didn't want it to be true. I'm sorry Naruto. Hanabi's gone. The crack of the counter shattering under Naruto's prosthetic hand echoed in the sharp silence that followed. Anko shifted restlessly on the hospital bed. She hated hospitals. All the instruments, equipment, and the clinical sterility of the place reminded her of Orochimaru's bases. She didn't even know why she was here, just that it had something to do with the attack on the Hokage. Little chance of keeping that secret. The whole village knew by now that the old man was in critical condition. People could only speculate on who did it, but Anko knew. Deep in her gut, she knew this could only be her old master's handiwork. The door opened, and she was surprised to see an unexpected mop of blonde hair. Naruto strode in with narrowed eyes and a tight expression, as if he was visibly restraining himself from any kind of emotion. It was strange, she only had the occasional interaction with him and she knew him to have excellent emotional control. Must have been something big to rattle him so bad. Coat off, he ordered, voice just as clipped and curt as his face would suggest. Really big then. Listen kid, she started with a grin, I know the rumors about me, but you'll be sorely disappointed if you think I'm that easy without a bit of wine and dine, eh? Not so much as a flicker of his lips, tough crowd. Off, he repeated, this time with an underlying pressure to his voice that seemed to make the air thicken. Anko complied, clicking her teeth as she was left in her mesh shirt. It didn't get so much as a blush from the kid. What was she working with here? A robot. He moved around her, zeroing in on her neck. The moment she realized what was going on, she turned sharply, a hand coming up to cover the curse seal. What are you doing? What does it look like? He shot back. I'm examining your seal, because Jiraiya told me that when he examined it years ago, he found a biological component that he couldn't explain. I'm here to see if it matches the enzyme vector that is currently turning the Hokage body into a battleground. If it does, then there might be a chance I can find a way to combat it. So, put your hand down, stop talking, and let me work. Her jaw snapped shut from her prepared retort and after a moment's hesitation, lowered her hand. She just sat there quietly as he examined the little Mitsudomo, at least until she felt a sharp sting. Ow. What the fuck was that? I got rid of the inhibitor seal. It was getting in the way. Anko's eyes widened slightly. Every other time her seal had been examined, none of them had so much as touched Jiraiya's evil sealing shiki, and this kid had just removed it altogether. A moment later Naruto clicked his teeth irritably. Not enough, I need to open it up. What do you mean? Ope, she hissed as a cold burn slowly spread out from her neck, as if somebody was dragging icy gravel across her skin. She was no stranger to a bit of pain, but some warning might have been nice. Right now, she felt like some vivisected specimen under the microscope. When she looked down, she was even more alarmed to spot little black squiggles, like flaming tattoos, squirming across her skin, down her arm, across her chest and, if what she felt was correct, across the left side of her face. She was forced to endure that slow, icy pain for a good few minutes before Naruto hummed in satisfaction. She barely felt the little prick of the needle underneath everything else. Got it, Naruto muttered, setting a small syringe of purple fluid in a tray next to her. As she watched, the substance inside, barely even a milligram from the looks of it, seemed to squirm and writhe unnaturally. I'll reseal this now. She felt him place his hand on her neck, where the seal was usually restricted to, only to pause. What? She asked nervously. It was never a good sign when somebody went messing about with the seal that tormented her for over a decade now, less so when they hesitated. Nothing, parts of this just look familiar. She blinked, still trying not to squirm from the pain of the opened seal, but intrigued nonetheless. Familiar how? Familiar as in, I could get rid of this familiar. She hated herself for it, but despite her best efforts she felt a little hope welling in her chest. Uzumaki was supposed to be sealing prodigies. She had read that somewhere, right? The brat was some kind of puppet master or something, and there was no way those wooden creatures moved as fluidly as they did without a bit of fuinjutsu. I'm not sure. She briefly felt something like paper press against her neck, then with a twist of his hand, she felt the seal spiral back inwards. It left an itchy tingle on her skin. Then came the cold tickle of an ink brush as he reapplied the evil sealing shiki. So, she started after she was certain he had finished. Got everything you needed. Her voice came out with less venom than she had intended. She felt drained from the whole procedure. That remains to be seen. Good. She turned in place and tried to lamp him one right between the eyes, only to find her fist caught by his strange, grey hand, his icy blue eyes drilling into her. Don't do that. She returned the look with similar heat, scowling. I don't like feeling like some test subject to be experimented on. So, when you come in here, acting like Orochimaru 2.0 and expecting me to just take everything you do lying down, I'm damn sure going to knock a couple reminders into that blonde dome of yours. His eyes merely narrowed. Don't compare me with him. Don't act like him then. What exactly do you have to be angry about right now, huh? I'm the one who just had to go through a game of Operation, playing as the board. The cold veneer finally cracked as Naruto abruptly turned on the spot and punched the wall, sending cracks spidering through the plaster and leaving a fist-shaped impression when he pulled the arm back. He just stood there, taking deep breaths, before straightening back up and grabbing the syringe. I don't have time for this. My apprentice has just been stolen away, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it because the man who kidnapped her is damn near untraceable. What I can do, is find a bloody cure for the poison killing this village's leader. So, if people would just shut up, get out of my way, and let me do this, I could. He was interrupted by a bell tolling throughout the village, 3 long, deep notes that seemed to brush all other sounds to the side. It left a smothering silence in its wake and, as one, the entire village seemed to take a deep, expectant breath. The Hokage was dead. Jiraiya found Naruto exactly where he expected the teen to be, back in the hospital's labs, poring over some notes on the counter. Burning the midnight oil. He asked with a ghost of a smile. He couldn't muster up the energy for much more than that. Naruto turned and glanced out the window, noting the fact that it was well beyond midnight. He had completely lost track of time, and had the shadows under his eyes to prove it. Well, more so than usual anyway. He turned his attention to Jiraiya instead, getting a good look at the man. He looked tired, lacking any of his usual upbeat attitude. Naruto supposed that should be expected after watching his sensei, one of the greatest shinobi to ever live, die in his hospital bed like a frail old man. Ninja shouldn't go out that way. The Hokage shouldn't have gone out that way. Tell me you're not still working on the antidote, are you? The man asked, glancing at the equipment to Naruto's side. No, the blonde admitted, earning a sigh of relief from the man. I finished that hours ago. Still too late to save the Hokage, but his pride wouldn't allow him to not go through with it anyway. He was right. Examining the inactive form of the enzyme, after confirming it was a mutated strain of the one used in the Sandyme's poison, had revealed exactly which chemical receptors he needed to block to restrict its ability to absorb natural energy from the environment. 47 minutes, that was the difference between Sarutobi Hiruzen living and dying. Why torture yourself like that? Jiraiya asked. The knowledge that his sensei could have lived, if they had known better, if they were faster, if the decontamination of his room was more thorough, any number of reasons, was nothing but a burden. Naruto didn't answer, turning back to the notes on the counter. Jiraiya suspected the only reason he hadn't gone home yet was because he was too absorbed in whatever he was doing to make the effort of actually walking back. He moved to look over the teen's shoulder, only to sigh. I'd recognize those seal notes anywhere, and kid, if you're trying to figure out a way to remove Orochimaru's curse seal, you'll be pulling more than one all-nighter. He should know, that damn Mitsudomo had given him restless nights for weeks after he first got his hands on it. It looked like Naruto had made a copy of it when he had Anko's opened up, although strictly the design without any of the functionality. I'm not trying to remove it, the blonde muttered irritably, gesturing absently to a section of the design that had caused Jiraiya nothing but consternation in the past. I'm trying to figure out why this part seems so familiar. Can't help you there, kid. Orochimaru and I are probably about level when it comes to Fuinjutsu, but we went in very different directions. While I focused on the more practical aspects, sealing, explosives, trying to replicate the ungodly prodigious work of his student, he was always more interested in the abstract. And that's exactly how he would describe the function of the curse seal, because no matter what angle he approached it at, the damn thing made no sense. Did I ask for your help? Naruto said, just as one of his clones hopped through the window and deposited a small pile of papers next to him. Jiraiya knew that look. He had worn the same expression after he heard about Nawaki's death, and the QB attack. It was the look of somebody who was going to work either until they got what they wanted, or they fell to exhaustion. He also knew, if the kid was anything like him, that there wasn't a damn thing he could say to break Naruto out of it. What's that? He asked, referring to the sheaf of papers Naruto was now absently leafing through. Naruto only shot him a disgruntled glance for a second before getting back to it, probably realizing that Jiraiya wasn't going to take the hint and leave. Various Fuinjutsu shiki I've collected over the years that I either haven't had time to examine fully, or deemed unimportant. He knew that he had seen something like this before, he just couldn't pinpoint where exactly. Wait, Jiraiya interjected suddenly, looking down at the papers. Go back, what's that one? Naruto found the correct sheet and lifted it out of the stack, examining it closely. One of the seals on Sasori's body, inscribed inside his torso around the socket that connected him to his last biological component. I had assumed it was some kind of interface at the time, but couldn't figure out exactly what it did. Now that he got a second look at it though, he was certain that this was what his mind was attempting to draw parallels with. He set it down beside the copy of Anko's curse seal and scrutinized the two side by side, Jiraiya grabbing a chair to join him. It's not identical, the older man mused, but see there, that matrix of kanji, that should be the interface between conscious and subconscious chakra molding. He'd seen similar seals used in extremely complex traps that could replicate certain jutsu. But it's been altered. It's still an interface, but, between what and what? No, I've seen these kanji used before. Naruto muttered, grabbing the notebook where he kept his more concrete Fuinjutsu knowledge. He flicked it open to the right page from memory. It's sort of like the seals theorized to store medical chakra for field teams by the Nadaime. See, he was trying to work out an interface between the spiritual half of chakra and the body, to bypass the Hayflick limit when normal cell regeneration is stimulated. If he remembered right, Tsunade had gone on to create something similar. Jiraiya's eyebrow rose, not having realized how deep Naruto had gone with his Fuinjutsu study. What he didn't know was that, despite only really seeing it as a means to an end for his puppetry, Naruto had a lot of ideas for what he could get his puppets to do. While most fell through as unfeasible, Naruto often tested the ideas extensively before he came to that conclusion. It had been how he ended up linking his artificial chakra systems with Sasori's synthetic muscles, despite the fact that they should have been two disparate systems he would have been forced to control separately. So you're saying, Orochimaru is trying to store pure spiritual energy in the curse seal. It made a sort of sense, if Senjutsu was involved. Drawing in natural energy was extremely dangerous without the proper training to balance it with one's chakra, so if Orochimaru could work out a way for the seal to do that for the user, he'd have an army of near unstoppable monsters at his beck and call. Except, from what he had seen, most curse seal users were anything but stable. No, it only resembles the structure of that shiki, the kanji are different, more complex. That was confusing, because storing unmolded spiritual energy, if possible, would have been an incredibly complex achievement. If Orochimaru was trying to contain something even more difficult, even more abstract than that. That bastard, Jiraiya muttered, eyes going wide. He couldn't have. He nearly shoved Naruto out of his way in his attempt to scrutinize the two different designs, mumbling to himself as he went. Yes, if he wanted to, it makes sense if, there are the connections, but the storage is, oh, so he used that too. He slammed his hands down on the table, grinning more fiercely than Naruto had ever seen him, eyes practically dancing with triumphant anger. I've got you this time, you bastard. I'm not a rental service you know, Anko grumbled, once again stripped of her coat so that Jiraiya and Naruto could poke around her seal. As if that hadn't been annoying enough without the world's greatest self-proclaimed super pervert in attendance. She had already caught him staring at her mesh-covered breasts more than once, and they had barely begun. Good, because we're not paying you, Naruto shot back absently, checking and double-checking the designs Jiraiya had spent all night drawing up. For the work of a single night, they were incredibly impressive. Naruto might have been widely read in Fuinjutsu, having dabbled in a little of just about everything in the course of his study, but he couldn't deny Jiraiya's expertise in what the man was good at. Doesn't mean you won't be compensated though, the older man piped in merrily. There was an edge to his mirth though, one that Anko recognized all too readily. She shared that same expression when she was about to get some rightful revenge. Considering she was the subject of the current ministrations, it didn't fill her with comfort. How would you like to help track down Orochimaru, Anko? More than I want a lifetime supply of dango, an invitation to the Hyuga compound for one of their tea ceremonies, and the flexibility to eat myself out. Both Jiraiya and Naruto paused what they were doing to stare at her strangely. What? I like tea ceremonies. Neither of them were willing to touch that with a 10-foot pole and wisely moved on. So, what's this about anyway? I thought it was pretty established that Snakeface was slipperier than a butted eel. Nothing we've ever done before has worked to track him. She would know, ever since being abandoned with this cursed hickey, she had been tailoring her skills towards tracking and pursuit to the point where she was probably more reliable than an Inuzuka nin dog. Yeah, well, Snake Face finally made a mistake. It turns out that he left an imprint, of sorts, in the curse seal that, with a bit of finagling, we can use to track him down directly. Naruto scoffed at that. It was certainly one way to put it. Jiraiya had decided it was best not to let Anko know that Orochimaru had essentially severed off a piece of his own soul and stuck it in her neck. For what reason, Kami only knew. It was a lucky break for them though. A lot of advanced Fuinjutsu relied on sympathetic properties, which was why Shiki used for sealing tended to be odd-numbered, so the chakra wouldn't get into a resonance pattern and bring the entire matrix down. Likewise, barrier seals tended to be even-numbered for precisely the opposite reason, so that the resonating chakra could grow stronger with limited input from the user. In this case, the fact that they had a little fragment of Orochimaru's soul mean that, with a little tweaking to the curse seal, they could use it to track down other parts of the man's immortal essence, or whatever he had sealed. Naruto wasn't entirely sold on this whole soul business. Either way, it should lead him right to him. No shortcuts. No hiding. Orochimaru had gotten overconfident and made a mistake that was about to bite him in the metaphysical ass. Naruto was only annoyed they couldn't do something crueler to the man's soul directly. What the hell are you waiting for then? Anko said, gaining a wicked grin as she bent her head to make her neck more accessible. Pop this bastard open and get to fiddling. She paused momentarily, smile turning bemused. Ha, deja vu. She shook herself off it and gestured for Jiraiya to begin. Come on already, what do you need from me? A little patience, and unfortunately, a bit of pain. The man replied. This is probably going to hurt. For a moment, Anko's eyes became dark. I doubt it could be worse than 15 years of aches, nightmares and regrets. Naruto hopped down off the counter and clapped his hands together. Only one way to find out. He exclaimed with forced mirth. When he got flat stares from the other two, he shrugged. Wrong atmosphere. Mission protocol became somewhat blurry in the absence of an acting Hokage. That was to say, such a thing had never happened in the history of Konoha. Tobirama was slated to be the Nadaime long before his brother's death, and Hiruzen was chosen just before his own sensei's untimely demise. The Sandaime had been there to pick the reins back up after the Yondaime sacrificed himself, but hadn't designated another successor before finally succumbing to his wound. In that regard, it was rather unclear as to who exactly was in charge until another Hokage was chosen, which would take time. The Anbu commander already had his responsibilities, and Shikaku was picking up the slack of the paperwork, much to the Nara's chagrin, but neither were cage material. Tsunade had left the village almost the moment Hiruzen passed, bars across the village letting out sighs of relief, so, as the last remaining student of the Sandaime, Jiraiya was unceremoniously tossed into the spotlight. He utilized his newfound and entirely unwanted power to authorize this little excursion. By anyone's consideration, it was a rather small hunting party, considering their quarry. Too many though, and they risked tipping their hand. Plus, Konoha had once again been thrown into overdrive to project their stalwart strength in the face of their leader's death, and few were available. This was how Leaf Ninja mourned, by living up to the memory of their leader. Still, it was filled with skilled Anbu operatives that had prior experience dealing with Orochimaru's various abominations, as Jiraiya assured them that any base of his former teammates would be swarming with, as well as Naruto, Anko and the man himself. It wasn't strictly professional to allow operatives with a personal vendetta on such a mission, but neither of the three were feeling all that professional as Anko led them into a small humid grove, deep within rice country. She hissed in pain, rolling her shoulders in an attempt to alleviate the steady ache that only grew as they approached her former mentor. Whatever Naruto and Jiraiya had done to her seal, it essentially made it more painful the closer they got to another fragment of Orochimaru's soul. Right now, it felt like it was trying to burn a very stylized hole through her flesh, and the thought made her grin despite the pain. He's close. He had to be. Any further and the pain would be debilitating. Jiraiya obliged her by channeling a little chakra into the seal that was inscribed around her curse mark, relieving the pain. They didn't need it anymore. Jiraiya lifted a hand and the Anbu immediately spread out to locate the entrance. It didn't take long to find. Orochimaru was nothing if not predictable in his arrogance. A large boulder had been lightly sculpted to resemble a yawning snake's mouth, easily overlooked if one didn't know what to look for. The small team filtered in, now with Jiraiya taking point. He knew Orochimaru the best and knew what to expect from the man's bases. Occasionally they were forced to stop so that Jiraiya could deactivate certain security measures that would have given him away. From near the back of the group, Naruto was impressed. He wasn't certain he would have found some of those. It was a last-minute reminder of just who they were dealing with here. While he knew that he was strong in regard to the village's pecking order, he knew that any fight with Orochimaru would be nothing less than a difficult slog, win or lose. But that wasn't why he was here. Jiraiya motioned for the group to pause, and the Anbu immediately spread out in well-practiced formation around the simple wooden corridor. Naruto thanked Kami. The endless stop and start through the monotonous chevron-patterned halls had been getting appallingly dull. They hadn't even run into a guard of any kind yet. Utilizing one of his own hairs, hardened to steel-like strength, Jiraiya expertly picked the lock off the first door they had come across, set into the side of the corridor across from a simple candle-lit alcove. It turned out the caution was for nothing, as it turned out to just be a well-lit, but unguarded laboratory. Naruto filtered in last, leaving a couple Anbu out in the corridor, and raised an eyebrow at who was strapped down in the middle of the room. Anko was grimacing to his side, doing her best not to look, and for good reason. Hidden, because he knew that man's appearance off by heart after staring at his picture for 2 years now, lay on a metal table in the middle of the sterile operating theater. His entire chest cavity had been opened up, held apart by 2 large metal clamps. Around him, his organs had been surgically removed and left to float in glass jars of varying sizes. Coming closer though, Naruto could see that, even as he watched, the missing parts of the former Akatsuki member were slowly growing back. He leaned over further, trying to get a good look at the tissue knitting itself together, only to jerk back as Hidden's eyes snapped open. He tried to struggle in place, making bloody gurgling noises as he stared up at them with wide, bloodshot eyes, but was securely fastened down by leather straps. He could barely even wiggle in place. From the looks of things, he was trying to scream something at them. Unsurprising, if unsuccessful, his diaphragm was floating in some green liquid to his right. It begged the question of how the man was even conscious, let alone alive. Naruto grabbed the wrist of an Anbu as he made to unstrap the silver-haired fanatic, catching the man's eye behind the mask. Don't. I agree with the kid, we keep moving, Jiraiya muttered. He was clearly disgusted by the living vivisection going on, repeatedly, by the look of the shelves of organs around them, but the glint in his eye told Naruto that he knew exactly who this was. What are you talking about? Anko cut in, glaring at the two of them. We can't just leave this guy like this. This guy, Naruto clarified, sneering down at the struggling Hidden, is the same lunatic that killed Akamaiki Chooser, and countless others during the attack 2 years ago. He wondered if the cultist had been here this entire time. No wonder he had appeared to vanish off the face of the earth. The look on Anko's face couldn't have changed faster, twisting into a cold scowl. Fuck him, let's go. Hidden just screamed silently up at him, and Anko took the opportunity to spit directly into his open mouth, huffing spitefully as she swept out of the room. I liked Chooser. He always brought the best rations on missions. They saw a lot more horrific sights like that as they swept through the facility. Rooms filled to the brim with human body parts, others with cages containing snarling, barely human people with deformed, mottled gray limbs. Thankfully, some were just normal fare for an underground base. They even came across a barracks, filled with stiff, uncomfortable-looking beds, despite the fact they had yet to run into another soul that wasn't a test subject or dead. The lack of opposition only became creepier the deeper they delved, and the hairs on the back of Naruto's neck stood on end as they approached the end of a long corridor, now dozens of feet below the surface. Anko shifted uncomfortably, wincing and holding her neck. Jiraiya forewent the subtlety this time, simply slamming the door open to reveal a large, amphitheater-esque room built around a large depression in the ground. It might have looked like some sort of gladiatorial arena if not for the medical equipment crowding the platform in the middle. Orochimaru was hunched over something on a table, not even bothering to turn as he continued with his work. So, you finally managed to find me, Jiraiya, he mused in his whimsical, effeminate voice, dropping something into a tray at his side with a clatter. I might almost have been impressed, if it hadn't taken you over 20 years. With languid grace he stood up straight and stepped aside, holding something up to the light. It was unmistakably a human eye, pale and lacking any distinct iris or pupil. The moment the assembled group spotted it, they nearly buckled as a foul, evil presence seemed to slam down on him like a lead weight. Jiraiya turned with wide eyes to see Naruto glaring hatefully forward, eyes reduced to thin red slits and whisker marks turned into ragged black scars. A vile, unmistakable presence rolled off him in waves, standing his spiky hair up from the sheer pressure of it. "You bastard," the teen growled, voice seeming to reverberate unnaturally as if layered over another. "I'll kill you," he roared as he launched forward in a blur of red, faster than Jiraiya had ever seen the blonde move. He shot across the open space like a feral Inuzuka, running on all fours and leaving visible gashes in the ground where his hands touched down. The moment he tried to leap at Orochimaru though, something was suddenly in between them. Naruto's clawed fingers scraped ineffectually against it with a shriek of tortured metal. Kakazu wasted no time in grabbing the out-of-control Jinchuriki by the neck, skin shimmering a dark gray like living metal, and throwing him across the room. Once again reduced to a living projectile, Naruto's flight this time was far from controlled. He slammed into a far wall and just kept going, crashing right through the stone into the room beyond. Kakazu didn't even spare a glance at Orochimaru before stalking off after him, not even slowing when Jiraiya whipped his hair around, sending out a volley of sharpened, senbon-like hairs. They plinked harmlessly against his metallic skin, barely phasing the man as he disappeared through the hole after his prey. Jiraiya made to follow, only for Orochimaru's voice to ring out again in the closed space. "Leaving so soon, Jiraiya? Was I wrong in thinking you were here for me? If he wasn't," Anko growled, cracking her knuckles and drawing two kunai, "then I sure as hell am." Orochimaru merely tilted his head, adopting a queer little smile that glinted with barely restrained amusement. "Anko-chan, adorable as ever. Come for a training session from your sensei. I would be more than happy to give you and all your little friends here a lesson." Jiraiya's eyes darted between the crumbling hole in the wall and the brewing tension between Anko and Orochimaru. In a heartbeat he knew who needed his help more and, with a quick mutter of, "Sorry kid," turned to his old teammate. Naruto could handle himself, and if he couldn't, the Kyuubi sure as hell could. Naruto's hand curled into a fist as he lay in the rubble his body had made going through the wall. Sharpened nails, more akin to claws, dug little cuts into his palm that healed as fast as he could make them. He took a single long, deep breath, before exhaling back out. With it went the oppressive atmosphere shrouding him, and his features slowly returned to normal as he picked himself up. Kakazu appeared to have thrown him into a large, open space with balconies rimming the walls. It reminded him of the preliminary arena from his Chunin exams, and from the blood staining the ground and walls, he assumed it had a similar function here. "Thanks for that," he said as he stood back up, cracking his neck. "I wasn't thinking too clearly, and I'm going to need all my faculties to put you in the ground." Kakazu sneered from behind his specialized headwrap, picking his way over the debris strewn across the floor. "You should have continued using the beast's chakra. This will be much too short otherwise." "Funny," Naruto mused as he threw his arm out to the side, unraveling and unsealing a nari in one smooth motion. "I was thinking something similar." Kakazu observed the fox puppet dispassionately, sizing up the lithe figure that was nearly as tall as he was. Apparently satisfied, he cracked his fingers noisily and smirked beneath his covering. "Tashi no Naruto. Now that the Akatsuki is gone, I don't have to worry about missing out on your 45 million Ryo bounty. Is that what it's up to these days?" The blonde mused indifferently, fully aware of what his black market price was. His features set into a cold mask as he stepped back, letting Inari take his place in front. "Perhaps it's like that for a reason." The former tacky nin merely scoffed, thick black cords writhing under his skin impatiently. "The arrogance of youth, you think." He was cut off mid-sentence as Inari dashed forward with speed that surprised him. In less than a second she was suddenly in his face, claws brought around for a vicious swipe. He didn't even move, and once again the attack proved ineffectual, scraping harmlessly against his now faintly reflective skin. That was actually enough to surprise Naruto. These were the same claws, sharp and sturdy enough to forcefully breach an experienced Hyuga's chitin. Kakazu knifed his hand forward and Inari flowed around it like water, tails lashing out with the same momentum only to clang harmlessly against the man's steely skin. Kakazu's smirk only grew at the weak attacks and he continued to strike at the flexible puppet. However, where he proved invulnerable, Inari proved untouchable, and his knife-handed strikes missed every time. A faint, almost inaudible click sounded from the base of her spine as one of her tails visibly bristled. When it next came around, the hairs along one side abruptly stuck outwards, flattening until the tail resembled an edged blade. A hum filled the air as the appendage was charged with Ratan chakra. Still, when the newly bladed tail struck Kakazu, it only succeeded in sending little arcs of electricity skittering along Kakazu's body. It nearly gave Kakazu the opportunity to grab at her, but the nimble puppet darted back just in time. That was unexpected. Naruto had read the after-battle reports of all the ninja facing Akatsuki members during the invasion. The ones on Kakazu informed him the man used autonomous masked creatures formed from his kinjutsu, the Gyeongu, and a living heart. Each was supposed to possess a different chakra nature, including the one he kept in his chest that provided a sturdy earth-based protection. Hinata had managed to pulverize that one with a Juken palm strike, but Ratan chakra should have worked just as well. Then again, this defense was like no earth jutsu he had ever seen. Are you just now coming to the realization of what exactly it is you face? Kakazu taunted as something bulged on his back. One of his masks burst from his body, forming a spindly bird-like creature from his black threads. It speared through the air directly at Naruto, bulging grotesquely around what should have been its neck. Fuyuten, Atsugai, Kakazu growled as his masked puppet released a wall of incredibly pressurized air right at the blonde. He wasn't defenseless though, and in a flash of white Inari was back at his side, a different tail bristling. Her clawed hands flashed through hand seals before drawing back, miming the action if not actually breathing in. Kaiten, Gokakyu no Jutsu, Naruto responded as Inari breathed out an enormous, red-hot sphere of flame. The moment it struck the wind technique it swelled past its already ridiculous size, turning white and slamming into Kakazu's side of the room with the force of a train. The blast rocked the facility, making the lights flicker for a few moments before the dust began to settle. Kakazu walked out of the smoke without being so much as singed. Even his clothes were undamaged. But that wasn't the point of the demonstration. We can play the jutsu game all you like, Naruto called out with a smirk, but anything you throw at me, I can return with the superior element. As if to demonstrate, 4 of Inari's tails bristled in turn, crackling, smoldering, becoming damp, and darkening one after the other in a quick cycle. He had read up on Kakazu extensively, and was certain Inari could match his elements blow for blow. His other puppets could use any jutsu he was familiar with, but only with his own proficiency. Inari was different. Each of those 4 tails was imbued with a different elemental affinity, using the same technique he had used to get down how Conan's ability worked. Each contained a limited amount of elemental chakra, true, but only limited in his terms. Each had more than enough for dozens of jutsu of their respective elements before needed to be refilled. The only element left out was wind, because he had that covered himself just fine. You sound quite certain, Kakazu said, his other 3 masks ripping themselves free of his back and forming into strange, ill-defined creatures. But you are not the only one to have grown and learned since that assault. His smirk turned vicious as the largest of his creatures walked forward, resembling a grotesquely overweight bear on its hind legs. You think I am in Orochimaru's employ for the sake of it? The porcelain mask resting atop the mass of black threads opened, the air around it already shimmering from the heat haze. Naruto prepared Inari to counter with a water technique, only for his eyes to widen as the mask abruptly sprayed out a gout of liquid magma, leaving a trail of molten rock across the ground that forced him and his puppet to dive in opposite directions to avoid. No water technique was going to overpower that. Yoten, Kazan Funker, Kakazu muttered with a superior grin. Orochimaru pays me well, but my true reward is the powerful hearts he provides. You stand no chance, Jinchuriki, I am your superior in every way. No, Naruto muttered as he rolled back to his feet, making sure Inari hadn't been hit. She was steady, but he didn't want to test her against actual lava of all things. What you are, is pissing me off. An expectedly childish response, his opponent called back, crossing his arms confidently. Now, try not to melt too much, I need your face recognizable for the bounty office. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.